This empire had a love-hate relationship with the Byzantine Empire, competing for centuries. It even came close to defeating and extinguishing the Byzantines at one point. When it rose to power, it destroyed the Parthian Empire and once divided the Sassanid Empire with the Turks. However, ultimately due to bad luck, it was buried by the newly rising Arabs. That is right, this is the Second Persian Empire, also known as the Sasanian Empire or Sassanid Empire. Geographically, it connected east and west, and temporally, it sat at the dividing line between classical antiquity and the Middle Ages. Today we're going to talk about the story of this once mighty Second Persian Empire. The first empire established by Iranians, Persians in history was the Achaemenid Empire, which existed from the Lutha century BC to the Cta century BC. It was the first empire in human history to span Asia, Europe, and Africa. However, around Sassanid BC, the Achaemenid Empire was conquered by Alexander the Great of Greece. From then on, Persians were ruled by foreign tribes for several centuries, first by Greeks, then by Parthians. After Alexander's death, his general Seleucus controlled the Asian region, and thus Iran fell under the rule of the Seleucid Empire. In the middle of the Sassanid century BC, signs of decline and division appeared in the Seleucid Empire, leading to Iran falling into the hands of the Parthians again. However, after several centuries of dormancy, Persian power began to develop once more on this land. At the beginning of the Sassanid century AD, a Persian local family named Sassan rose gradually. They claimed themselves as spiritual successors of the Achaemenids and expanded their territory continuously until they raised the banner against the Parthian Empire. Under the leadership of Ardashir, the Sassanians fought several battles and finally defeated the last king of the Parthian Empire, Artabanus IV, in Ar-Arsaid. Thus, the Second Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire, rose to power. To commemorate this great victory, Ardashir ordered a carving on the Rock of Rustum, where he is depicted riding his horse over Artabanus IV and receiving an emblem of military authority from Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian god of light, who in turn rides over Ahriman, the evil spirit. This shows that the Sassanid Empire adopted a system combining military power with religion, making Zoroastrianism the state religion and the king as God's representative ruling Iran. For more information on Zoroastrianism, you can check out my previous episode. Around Rctad Ardashir, I's son Shapur, became his Khojen ruler, a unique practice in the Sassanian royal family to ensure a smooth transition of power by having the crown prince rule alongside the king, while other princes serve as local officials. And this heir, Shapur, did not disappoint and became one of the most formidable conquerors in Sassanian history. Those familiar with Roman history should know that during Laumbai Sensawards and Laumbai Bashaset, Rome suffered a severe crisis due to invasions from outside, civil wars, and economic collapse. This period is known as the crisis of the 3rd century. During this time, the greatest external threat to Rome was Shapur. In Ars-Sen AD, Roman Emperor Gordian III invaded Mesopotamia in an attempt to reclaim land lost by Ardashir, but he was killed by Shapur and Chionites in Ars-C AD. In Ar-War AD, Shapur defeated the Roman army at Barbalissos, killing all Leuchen Sas Oldias and capturing Senchati cities from Rome. In Ar-Bai-Luti AD, Shapur launched his third war, seizing eastern Mesopotamia, Syria, and the eastern Mediterranean coast, and even captured Roman Emperor Valerian, along with many senators, an extremely rare event in world history. Today we can still see a relief of Valerian kneeling before Shapur, on the Rock of Rustum, and there is also a place called Valerian Prison in the ruins of Nishapur, likely where Valerian was held captive. Thus, Romans, Goths, Slavs, and other peoples from the Near East were all brought under Sassanian rule, reaching its peak territorial extent. In Arsinin AD, Shapur died and his son Hormizd ascended to the throne but only ruled for a year before dying, leading to a series of internal power struggles in the Sassanian court at the end of the 3rd century. During this period, Sassanians lost control over Armenia and were defeated by Roman Emperor Diocletian, forced into an unequal treaty, By then, the bureaucratic system and Zoroastrian priestly group had grown powerful enough to maintain stability without a strong monarch. In 17 AD, Hormizd II died, and his nephew Shapur II was supported by the nobility to ascend the throne. The noble class aimed to control power through puppet rulers, but was surprised when this heir who inherited his ancestors' fame quickly consolidated power after coming of age and launched external wars. Shapur II first turned eastward, eliminating remnants of the Kushans and Kidarites. Then in Sentan Archelu Adi he defeated Arab raiders in southwestern provinces of the empire, earning him the title Shahin Shah. From Sen-Sensi to Sen-Ali-Sen AD, Shapur II also fought a long and protracted war with Rome over Armenia. The two sides were at an impasse for more than 20 years without any clear victor. In the year Sen-Al-Lujo, Shapur II launched an attack on Syria and successfully captured Amida. However, in the year Sen-Luyal, when Roman Emperor Julian ascended to the throne, he immediately retaliated against Shapur II, defeating him multiple times and even coming close to capturing the Sassanid capital. But in June of the year Sen-Ai-Lu-Sen, the Persians pulled out their trump card, bringing elephants into battle which quickly routed the Roman army. The Roman Emperor Julian was seriously injured and died during his retreat. His successor, Emperor Jovian, had no choice but to negotiate peace with the Sassanids, ceding eastern Mesopotamia, Armenia, Nisibis, and other regions. In this way, relying on successful foreign wars, the power of the Sassanid Empire reached its peak by the time Shapur II died in Sensijo AD. However, after the death of this strongman, Shapur the Sassanid regime once again fell into the hands of the noble class. From the late 4th century to early 5th century, the noble class successively supported multiple monarchs. As soon as a ruler showed signs of independent thinking, they would be assassinated and replaced by another. This power game continued to play out in the palace until Bahram V ascended to the throne in Sepai Arshan AD. Breaking this pattern, Menchoun Dapor Jimen. Bahram V was a very legendary monarch in Persian literature, enjoying drinking, hunting, and poetry writing. However, he was not tolerant of religion. Since Roman emperors considered themselves leaders of all Christians worldwide, Christians were seen as potential rebels by him. Subsequently, the Emperor Yazdegerd II further tightened ideological control, requiring Armenian nobles to convert to Zoroastrianism, which sparked a large gen-scale rebellion in Armenia. Although Yazdegerd II successfully suppressed the Armenian uprising in Serten Wushiyawadi, this only strengthened the Armenians' national identity based on Christianity. After Yazdegerd II's death, the Sassanid Empire faced severe external threats from the Uages, who established the Kidara Empire in the east. Yazdegerd's son Peraz I fought 3 wars against the Kidaras, but suffered consecutive defeats and was captured in Sirse-Lushajo AD. He had to cede territory and pay tribute, using his own son Kawad as a hostage to secure his release. However, those who watched my episode on the Turkic Empire would know that the Sassanids eventually avenged themselves by destroying the Kidara Empire, alongside the Turks in Wubaylushu AD and dividing its territories. Therefore, although the Sassanid Empire suffered severe political infighting from the 4th to 5th centuries and was no longer invincible like during its initial expansion period, it still maintained considerable strength, enabling it to become powerful again in the 6th century. It is clear that the kings of the 5th century were the weakest, completely dominated by the noble and priestly classes. Although some kings managed to seize real power and weaken the influence of the nobility for a short time, political infighting within the palace remained severe, as did social class conflicts. Thus, in Sebaba Adi, when Kavadaisi, who had once been held hostage by the Kidara Empire, ascended to the throne, he was determined to solve the political and societal problems of the Sassanid Empire. In this regard, he aligned with a Zoroastrian priest named Mazdak, and together they launched an extremely radical reform movement. Mazdak reinterpreted the Avesta, the holy book of Zoroastrianism, and based on these new interpretations forcibly confiscated wealth from nobles and clergy, opened granaries to distribute food, and redistributed land to farmers in order to weaken the power of the nobility and religious authorities. As expected, this met with fierce resistance from the noble class, who claimed that Kavadai would next redistribute their wives as well. They imprisoned him in the White Prison and installed his brother Jamasp on the throne. However, soon after, Kavadai escaped prison with help from his sister, fleeing to the Kidara Empire where he had once been a hostage. There, he raised an army and successfully reclaimed the throne in Sujeju-at, ruling for another 30 years. During this period, Kavadai continued his reform agenda, but learned from past mistakes by adopting a less radical approach. He organized land surveys to restructure tax systems and established positions within the church dedicated to assisting the poor and oppressed. Under the rule of this reformed Zen-minded king for over 3 decades, political and social conflicts in the Sassanid Empire were significantly alleviated, and its territory expanded further into Georgia, Central Arabia and Oman. Persian merchants traveled extensively to India, China, even as far as Indonesia, gradually controlling spice and silk trade routes between Asia and Europe. This laid the groundwork for the Sassanid Empire's peak under his successor Khosrow. Khosrow I ascended to the throne in Wusenyal-Adat and continued Kavadjenda by further weakening the power of great nobles, supporting small landholders economically, which greatly increased state revenue. Militarily, he divided the empire into 4 military districts with a commander for each district and constructed 3 fortresses along its borders, one to the northeast against the Kidara people, another in the northwest at the Caucasus passes, and a third to the southwest against Arabs. Under Khosrow I's rule, Sassanid culture also flourished, with medical texts, astronomical works, ritual books, fables and manuals for games like chess being translated from India in an unceasing stream. Philosophical works, scientific treatises, medical papers, and philosophical texts from Rome also made their way into the Sassanid Empire. Even some philosophers traveled all the way from Athens to King Khosrow I's court to discuss philosophical issues with him. Due to his keen interest in philosophy, Khosrow I was even given the title of Plato's philosopher Zen King. Alongside Roman Emperor Justinian I, Khosrow I is often listed by historians as 2 of the most enlightened rulers of late antiquity. These 2 really were a match made in heaven. On one hand, Justinian I successfully reclaimed vast territories that once belonged to the Western Roman Empire from the Vandals and Ostrogoths, but could never conquer the Sassanid hard nut, suffering repeated defeats under Khosrow I until he had to pay hefty sums of money just for peace. On the other hand, Khosrow I was inspired by Justinian I's example and learned how to rule and legislate like him. They influenced each other and spurred one another on, both trying to outdo the other. In the end, they jointly created a glorious era, which is considered quite an epic tale in history. Unlike the 1000-year-old Byzantine Empire, however, after Khosrow I's death, the Sassanid Empire's fortunes took a turn for the worse and fell into continuous crisis. In Wusejo AD, his son Hormizd Davif ascended to the throne. However, this new ruler was inferior in both politics and military affairs compared to his father, and due to arrogance and irritability, he offended many people. As expected, he ended up falling victim to his own bad temper. In Wal-Jd, General Bahram Chobin, who had achieved great military success, was humiliated by Hormizd Davif after a minor defeat. Out of anger, he rebelled against the king and even forced Khosrow II's son to seek help from Byzantine Emperor Maurice to defeat Bahram Chobin and ascend to the throne as Khosrow II. However, it turned out that Maurice was killed in Ludinar AD by a mutiny led by Phocas, who then usurped the imperial throne. Upon hearing of his benefactor's death, Khosrow II couldn't sit still anymore and declared war on Byzantium under the pretext of avenging Maurice. This marked the beginning of the 30-year-long Byzantine-Sassanid War. Initially, under Khosrow II's leadership, the Sassanid army achieved significant victories. They occupied Armenia and Syria from Liu-Baid to Liu-Yaoyao AD, captured Antioch in Liu-Yao-Sen AD, conquered Jerusalem and seized the True Cross in Liu-Yao-Si AD, took Egypt in Liu-Yao-Jo AD, and even occupied large parts of Anatolia by Liu-Ar-Arsine AD. Khosrow II was thus given the title of victorious king. However, since Liu-Yaolin AD, with Byzantine Emperor Heraclius ascending to the throne and stabilizing internal turmoil, the situation had actually been changing quietly behind the scenes. The Byzantines then adopted a defensive strategy, not rushing to recover lost territory but aiming to wear down their opponents, while conserving their own strength. By Luci RRR, they had accumulated enough power and launched a major counteroffensive, dealing a heavy blow to the Persian army in Anatolia. From Liu Seka to Liu they invaded Persian heartland, burned Zoroastrian temples, and finally achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Nineveh in Liu Artsi, nearly bringing the Sassanid Empire to its knees. In the end, the Sassanid nobles, seeing the writing on the wall, united to assassinate Khosrow II and sued for peace with Byzantium, thus putting an end to the war. However, once Khosrow II was dead, the Sassanid Empire again fell into severe internal political strife. The nobles and priestly factions resumed their Game of Thrones, swapping out more than 30 kings in just 4 years, a pace absolutely unprecedented and unlikely to be repeated. The smallpox pandemic of Liu Rsnd only made matters worse, drastically reducing the army, halving tax revenues, leaving farmland abandoned, and bringing the state apparatus to the brink of collapse. Meanwhile, on their other flank, the Arabs had united under the banner of Islam and begun their expansion. Then, between Liu Sen and Liu Sen Liu, with the Sassanid Persians reduced to barely a tenth of their former strength, the Arabs easily swept in and finished them off. An empire that had lasted over 400 years was conquered by the Arabs in just 4 years. By Liu Wu Yao, the remaining Sassanid forces that had been putting up stubborn resistance in the east were also completely eliminated, and the once mighty Second Persian Empire came to a dramatic end. Yet, the Arab conquest of the Persians was much like the Roman conquest of the Greeks. Though the Arabs ruled over Persian lands, in reality it was the Arabs who were conquered by Persian civilization. The regional influence of Sassanid Persia was so powerful that when Islamic civilization stepped onto the world stage, it had no choice but to follow Persian models, in many respects, ultimately absorbing almost entirely the Persian bureaucratic system, language and culture. The pre-Zen Islamic Arabs were little more than scattered tribes herding in the desert, with little culture of their own. Thus, throughout the Ba'th-2 centuries, Arab rule over the Persians was essentially a process of Persianization of the Arab Empire. Rather than saying that the Persians converted to Islam, it is more accurate to say that the Persians were the principal architects of Islamic civilization. Therefore, the Sassanid Empire's place in world history is by no means negligible. It served as a bridge between antiquity and the Middle Ages, between Iran and the Islamic world. It forms the deep foundation of both Islamic civilization and Persian national identity, and it was one of the last great superpowers of the ancient world.